In our presentation, we like to contemplate the significance of the spousal relationship within a belief system which perceives human existence as a product of an indifferent evolutionary process. So, the existential underpinning of the presentation, then, is driven by our values and our life experiences. So it's largely based then on our subjective understanding of the significance of marriage in an existence then absent of any type of preordained purposefulness. So some brief mention of our values is probably important. Is this volume okay? All right. So to begin with, neither of us belong to nor identify with any type of religious doctrine which offers explanations concerning the purpose of life. And secondly, we are in a marriage together, and our experiences of marriage have taught us that marriage can make life very painful, can make life very uncomfortable, and yet marriage can offer significant contributions to self-understanding and hence to our individual self-growth. So to us, marriage, as Martha Stewart would say, is a good thing. And to this end, we argue that the spousal relationship is the most significant relationship that we will experience in our lifetime. So in the presentation, we use the terms spousal and marital interchangeably. And here, when we're talking about spousal relationship, we defined it as those relationships that are marked by sexual relations among hetero and homosexual couples, and we assume that the partners are committed to each other, and we assume equality among the partners. We assume nonviolence in the relationship. So the intent of the presentation then is not to necessarily argue for the inherent superiority of the spousal over other types of relationships per se, yet we want to highlight the great potential of the spousal relationship to foster intimacy and to foster separateness and individual growth by way of the dialectical process. And in this examination, we draw mainly from Becker, from Charny, and from Schnarch. So the spousal relationship then is examined within the context of meaninglessness and hence in relation to death anxiety. Also, the spousal relationship is examined in relation to the will to self-actualize and to live fully. Now, given our awareness of the impermanence of our personal existence, we are prone to experience significant death anxiety. And Becker's analysis and his central thesis is that death anxiety, inherent in the human condition, is simply so overwhelming that we contrive a number of means to cope and to deny our mortality. The specter of death is so staggering, we create meaning to lull us. We create meaning to distract us from our fear of death. We create meaning to gain a sense of purpose. And of course, the sense of purpose, sense of security, how we choose to direct our lives, this can be contrived through many forms, through myth, through tradition, through culture, commerce, family, self-identity, etc. So putting aside for a moment then the whole extreme significance of the death anxiety, there also exists this life force which compels us to act out onto the world. In other words, to grow to fruition and participate in life to the fullest extent possible. And this, we think, is in part what Hillman expounds upon in his thesis in The Soul's Code, when he says it's about calling, it's about fate, it's about character, it's about innate image. So then, in addition to Becker's supposition concerning the inherent nature of death denial, the will to flourish, then, is also intrinsic to the human experience. So, in an effort to gain a deeper understanding of what the marriage has to offer in the struggle to come to terms with our mortality and in our efforts to self-actualize, its significance then is compared with other kinds of relationships. And in the end, we argue that in comparison to these other kinds of relationships, marriage offers the best opportunity to come to terms with our mortality. And in spite of this awareness, marriage is the best bet to help us grow to our fullest potential. The relationship with the child, we'll start there, and we'll go through these fairly quickly. The relationship with the child is very important. Yet the divergence between parent and child, of course, begins at birth with the act of birth. The relationship evolves over a period of development marked by levels and events that denote this existential separateness between parent and child. And many of us can relate to the advent of adolescence, when teenagers are seen breaking away from the family, breaking away from the ranks of the family. And in so doing, this may indeed threaten the parent's vision of not only what they expect from the youth, but also it can confront the parent's illusion of their child as an extension of themselves. Yet, in order for the child to someday deal with their own emerging world, the child needs to accentuate its own being to be that which the parent is not. And the reaction to this turn of events is dependent on a number of factors, which include the inherent drive within the child to differentiate both emotionally and physically. And it also depends on the ego strength of the parent to simply allow the schism to occur. Yet, eventually, our role as primary caretaker will come to an end. And the project of parenting then is divested as the child stands on their own. And when we look at the parent-child relationship over the lifetime, we see that they are far apart from one another on this whole continuum from birth to death. Now, the role of the parent can be very useful for us in many ways. We can make many movements in this whole relationship. The role of the parent can give us a sense of ourself through the process of giving to the other. Through the dialectical process with the child, the parent can experience significant growth, perhaps by becoming more patient or less egocentric. And in addition, parenting can challenge us to confront some of our own qualities, which are sometimes, whether we like it or not, mirrored in our children. Yet in the end, as parents, we can grow to a certain point only, since the relationship with the child is too one-sided. In the parental role, we spend more time giving than receiving. As children age, they become less focused on those who brought them into the world and more engaged by their own life events, separate from their parents. And this, in turn, means the parent-child dialectical process becomes arrested because there is no more other in the child to further challenge us on a personal basis. The child is not equal to the spouse and will never be equal to the spouse. And although the process of dependence and separation and the eventual individuation of the child can contribute to the parent's experience of what separateness is and what aloneness is, it cannot fully help parents understand the comprehension of aloneness, because the parent's never going to catch up to the child. That distance between child and parent is forever perpetual. So I think because of time, we'll just talk about the significance of the spouse. He gets the good part. Okay. So the friend relationship also provides us with the opportunity for self-growth, yet there are limitations here as well. So we have to ask, to what extent can the friendship relationship facilitate personal intimacy and self-knowing? Now, the friendship meets certain needs that are indicative of the parties involved, where our friendships generally focus on some specific aspect of our lives. And hence, in the workplace, colleagues will share viewpoints pertaining to their jobs, while gender-based relationships facilitate the expression of our experience of being male, our experience of being female. And one show on TV that makes this example is that show Sex and the City, which depicts, that rites of passage scenario of a group of women as they share in their struggle to develop their careers and to find the perfect mate. They think the perfect mate is out there. Yet it must be assumed that one day they're going to move on. One day they're going to get married maybe, or they'll move to another city, or one will have a child. Regardless, their interests are going to shift. And if the relationship is going to survive, it must continually redefine itself in tandem with how the group changes and shifts, which is a very big challenge. So it's argued that we can share many facets of our being with a friend, including some very significant life experiences of our self-development. Our friends are likened to our comrades in arms as they kind of symbolize who we are at that time, what we believe in at that time, and they enhance our sense of self. Yet, because it tends to be contextually bound to the stage of development and associated life experiences and needs, the friend relationship is limited to the extent to which it can facilitate our self-growth. And by its very nature, then, it's only allowed to develop a certain degree of intimacy. And the domain of heightened intimacy is generally saved for the spouse, while the friendship provides companionship and a sharing of our daily routines. It tends to come up short because it lacks sexual intimacy. And sexual intimacy is the privilege of the spousal relationship, and so integral to our journey for greater intimacy, thus greater self-awareness. And maybe I'll stop there and ask Garry if he could finish up, and maybe we can have some time for questions.
Thank you. I'm the lesser spouse. I just wanted to pick up where Erin left off and talk a little bit about the existential dialectical process in marriage. Are usually underrepresented in our spouses. The introvert versus the extrovert, the opinionated versus the reticent. He says that these panoply of attributes blend together in a dynamic struggle as a couple attempts to graciously work on their partner's weaknesses first, and of course their own secondly. Simply stated, we attempt to overcompensate for our spouses by functioning well in areas that they do not, all the while complaining that they need to improve in areas and ways that we are good at. They in turn do the same for us, graciously. Now, when you combine those two, husband and wife, or partner, you get a complete whole, the merging of strengths and weaknesses in the couple. Now, by overcompensating for our spouses, we allow them to not have to develop those weaknesses of their own. That means that each partner is at risk of becoming arrested at a certain level of development that ultimately leads to a considerable degree of conflict, as you know in some of your practices. Our initial choice of partner sets off the paradox. And as you know, we often it's appeared that we choose unconsciously, but there is a method to our madness. By choosing someone different from us, we are compelled to deal with that difference, which most likely represents a part of ourselves if we know that it's undeveloped. For example, we come to the highly impatient person, which tends to be oftentimes attracted to somebody who is methodical and patient. The impatient partner attempts to impose their approach to life, always being in a hurry, which I can identify with, on their spouse. Instead of looking at and developing this aspect of ourselves, or this aspect of themselves, in a part that attracted them to their spouse in the first place, they will likely dig in their heels. So as much as I try with my impatience, I'm not getting anywhere after 23 years. Resistance is both attributes are strengths and weaknesses, of course, at the same time, but are usually overdone in each spouse. In the existential dialectical process, the couple will attempt to resolve this dilemma by tempering their respective tendencies and becoming somewhat more alike. We're still working on that one. Each partner will be challenged to look at that weakness within themselves. The existential dialectical process leads to diversity and challenge and ensures that the couple and the individual will grow to be all they can be. For example, the organizational skills that were formerly the purview of my partner, or any partner for that matter, I have now developed somewhat roughly in myself. Their capacity to be emotionally separate, I have, through the process of self-soothing, mastered in myself. We struggle with our spouse to challenge them to take responsibility for their development and growth by virtue of being different from them. In time, we no longer want or need to do for them what they haven't or have been unwilling to do for themselves. Many couples reach a comfortable level of functioning with their spouse. The spouse or the relationship works to the point that most of the major conflicts have been resolved. The spouse has been maneuvered or has maneuvered themselves into a role that is good enough for both oneself and the other. Couples will often reach a level of development where the differences can be tolerated, and or we have carved out a niche for ourselves in a relationship whereby we become reliant upon our spouse to be a certain way that supports our self-identity. Or we have become dependent upon them to function in that continued way. This way, each can retain a self-image through borrowed functioning, a process whereby how I see myself, how strong I am, or I believe I am, and the extent to which I live my life is dependent on my spouse being a certain way. For example, a couple may take on certain prescribed roles. The partner who's successful in the outside world, maybe a strong business person, psychologist, whoever, it doesn't really matter, versus the emotional caretaker at home. That allows them to be comfortable with one another while at the same time allowing them to get some of their needs met somewhat vicariously. I do not need to make a big mark in the world, she or he may say, since I can live vicariously through my spouse's successes. My spouse, in turn, does not have to develop my emotional separateness because she or he is always there at home to emotionally take care of me. Each is allowed to function in a way that not only compensates for the shortcomings of the other, but also gives them a sense of identity and a sense of specialness that they may not be willing to give up. This mutual exchange permeates all aspects of the relationship and is based on the assumption that the couple is operating at the same level of differentiation. That is, the degree of their differences, or, put otherwise, the couple's capacity to tolerate their own separateness in face of their own death anxiety. This is challenged up to a certain level of tolerance. The couple, by remaining the same, bites off as much as they can chew, meaning that the relationship pushes the couple to not only confront their differences and provide for themselves what they relied upon their spouse to provide for them, but in the process, it also begins to accentuate their separateness. When we are fused in a relationship, we take our identity from the other and thus feel part of something. We are often emboldened by our spouse as our causa-sui. As we become attached to the other, lost within them, we become enamored with the image of who we believe they are, and as long as they stay that way, we will love them for what they can do for us. Our attachment, as Erin noted, in an indifferent and lonely world is to our spouse, so much so that by putting all our eggs in the spouse basket, we do not have to confront our separateness and hence our own mortality. Unfortunately, while at once needing the spouse as causa-sui provides us with a sense of belonging or being part of something, it can at the same time lull us into settling back into the comfort of the marriage and foregoing continued development. A couple might note, for instance, we have developed a comfortable way of seeing each other, and for all intents and purposes, to the outside viewer, we get along quite well. But in actuality, we've gotten to a level where intimacy has become arrested. To share any more of inner thoughts is threatening because it would jeopardize not only how I need that person to see me, but how I need to see myself. There are, as would be assumed, various levels of development in marriage, according to the existential dialectical process. For example, couples would have the ego strength to allow one another to develop their respective careers, not feel threatened by the other's self-sufficiency and strength, but at the same time, they may become arrested in their capacity to share their vulnerabilities with one another, intimacy. Another couple may tolerate their spouse's capacity for self-development, but may rail against being part of their spouse or being apart from their spouse, lest they have to experience their own isolation and loneliness. The existential dialectical process in marriage is not for, as David Schnarch would note, the faint of heart. While at one time it creates a greater understanding of the other and hence intimacy, it also pushes us into our existential separateness through the realization that our spouses are very much different from us and hence very much separate. It personifies two forces of life outlined in the introduction. While offering the individual the opportunity to flourish, to grow, to become all that one can be, it does so against the backdrop of inherent death anxiety, which can compel the partner to withdraw from life and use the relationship as a safe haven in which to retreat to and stop growing. In an existence that has, as we have noted above, no inherent meaning, we contend it offers still the greatest opportunity to come to know our true authentic self and gain the greatest degree of closeness in an otherwise impartial existence. Why spouse? Through the existential dialectic process, the spouse serves to differentiate us and, in so doing, reminds us of our lack of specialness. We are mortal, but during our time on earth, we do exist as something that has been experienced by the other to the fullest. As the marker of our existence, The spouse signifies that we do exist because as a human being we cannot fully come to know ourselves outside of a relationship. We can come to be known, or we can come to know our being in part by not being the other. Much in the same way, existence can only be known by non-existence. As we purport in a possible, a godless and meaningless existence in which we are separate and isolated, the spouse offers us the closest semblance of being part of something. The spouse does not offer the promise of immortality, but instead the opportunity to be known by another human being as intimately as possible, to be known in our true authentic self, not in an illusion or causa-sui or an image presented to the outside world. In the end, we state that it may be as simple as we live our existence, we recognize that we lived life, not knowing entirely why, but during the process, we have been able to share it with one other person. They have assisted us through the existential dialectical process to come to a greater degree of understanding of ourselves. They have been part of our effort to live out ourselves in the world, forcing us to live in the present and be aware of our existence by letting go of our illusions of immortality through whatever means we have chosen to express them. They have, through their courage, given us courage to be patient and await whatever our fate will be at the end of our life. In turn, we have come to love them by coming to know them as closely as humanly can be possible through our shared existence. In so doing, we come as close as we will ever be allowed to be with one other person in this existence. Thank you.
Following up on the chart talk this morning, and there's one there. I'm struck by Kierkegaard saying a major paradox, which is the beginning of change, is the acceptance of oneself unchanged. I'm wondering whether your view of marriage might combine that with a corollary that I've thought of over the years, which is that the beginning of change in a relationship is the acceptance of oneself unchanged.
Yeah, I think that's what we're sort of implying is that through this dialectical process, this the whole issue of marriage does force us to have to come to terms with our acceptance and greater understanding of ourselves, which is using that process with the spouse too. It's the very nature of the choices that implies that we are searching for that difference, for something to allow us to understand ourselves.
Well, the part that intrigued me was whether change was a part of this. It sounds like yours is a very non-technological approach. That is, that you have the experience, and as Kierkegaard would imply, having this experience, even though it's not really focused on let's change one another, becoming more intimate and accepting one another. That in itself is the biggest change one can go through. And which is very hard to happen outside of a relationship.
Mm-hmm. So the purpose is not to change the other, but somehow evolve.
Yeah, so we evolve through that conflict. And we're not going to, more commonly, we look to the other to change them. What we have chosen that person, which is the paradox. Because rarely, often I don't see people who are very much alike and attracted to one another. And so I ask them, why this person? Of course, that's a great deal of conflict. We assume there's some kind of underlying wisdom in the choice that is pushing them towards what they are seeking. They're using maybe their spouse as a template or a dream in the world to try to understand themselves more deeply.
That moment is
usually it's the other spouse that might reply to that. What's the point of being married if she or he or this or that or whatever? And I don't really offer any explanation other than you probably don't even have much of a choice anymore. This person is going to evolve and change, but that sets up a catalyst to force the other one. Because oftentimes what I see for couples is it's going to be one or the other is going to change, and that's the beauty of the relationship. Is one will have a greater courage in a particular area of that particular kind of relationship change to move on. So whether you like it or not, it seems to. But in turn, you ask the other person, starts to hold on to themselves and begin to look at, which is part of the narrow process of any person that we focus back on to. And assuming that whatever they're saying about you must be sort of seems to be true, but it's pretty exaggerated.
Would the client actually be willing to admit to getting married just in order to take care of it? That's the point that seems to be, it's implicitly there, and then at the moment of realization that it's not going to happen, that's when they'll say, well, what's the point of being married then? Well, the risk of being married is, well,
When we were brainstorming some of this, we had on a chart in my office of the faculty why spouse, because that was a stopping point for us. We could go on about this, but then we struggled with it. Sometimes we had to go for a beer. But we said, these are good questions of why spouse, and we really were still, but when we had this on a piece of flip chart, we were brainstorming, and everyone would come in and go, yeah. Can you answer that one for me? So, it's a struggle.
You know, I just want to address this there. I think and I understand the sense that you need separateness, but I think the term separateness doesn't say it all. Because the separateness, you're not talking about a fundamental self-object separateness. You're talking about a separateness that's ultimately the recognition of a oneness. So, I don't think it's a separateness that, the cocoon idea is you're not really moving them to recognizing some illusion of separateness. Through the recognition, that you're not using each other as objects is a sense of separateness that is actually a oneness. And, you see what I'm saying? Okay, so I think the word separateness is, and I know you know this, but it's not exactly what you mean by existential, and I recognize you know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems to me that what you're talking about is some kind of container within which this relationship takes place, and within kind of an alchemical vision, and within which you're identifying very clearly exactly where everything is at with each person. And so the kind of structure is a container strong enough to hold this heat while this whatever can happen takes place.
Yeah.
The achievement.
And getting back to that separateness that ultimately comes of this process of growth and whatever, I think in the end you see humanness, which is what I used to the humanness in the other person at best, or the best you're going to get is that recognition that we are we're moving towards the same end point, but sharing and recognizing that person the same thing as you would be. It's not a male, female, it's two people basically, but trying to get to know each other in their truest form, I suppose, as best they can, rather than as what you can do for the extension of yourself.
When we're talking about this, also we talked about that moment of death on your deathbed, and that might be something that you practice as well. When we're talking to the couple about whose eyes do you want to look at last, and we talked about that. And I don't want to see my kids and say, make sure you do the RSPs, and then take care of yourself and be whatever. But then that's. I'm done with that. Then, who do you want to be? Who do you want to look at? And that might be what we have to sort of do in the therapeutic relationship is important to you? What was important to you during your brief previous
The story of one of Yellen's books where he talks about that during the Civil War in the States when the northern soldiers fell in love with the southern woman, and when they were caught, the commanding officer tied them face to face together. And initially they thought, how lucky we are. When they were finally released, they never thought she had spoken at the word to each other.
So I'm going to thank all three of our speakers for a very enjoyable session. I'm sure that we have any other
More speakers.
Yeah, but it's like, I know that you.
papers or speakers.
Sorry.